Back in the 1950s, the American family was a carefully packaged product. To the rest of the world, Hollywood exported images of religious stability and domestic discipline, where morality was as neatly ironed as the father's Sunday suit. Media and sociologists of the era treated middle-class suburbs as zones of total safety. If a young person turned to crime, it happened in an urban slum. The manicured lawns of the planned community were supposed to be a natural defense against delinquency. But the post-war boom had created a demographic that didn't quite fit into the child or adult categories. The teenager had arrived as a distinct, recognized social class, with its own music, fashion, and frustrations. This new generation was struggling under the weight of expectations. The requirement to maintain a flawless, quiet middle-class existence in the shadow of their parents' rigid values created a unique kind of domestic suffocation. To tell their story, movies needed to move past the usual lectures. The emerging teenage culture required a mirror that showed the specific anxieties of the suburban home. Director Nicholas Ray took a clinical 1940s script about criminal psychology and decided to apply those theories to the kids living in the houses next door. Ray spent weeks interviewing judges, local police officers, and juvenile authorities. He even consulted with psychiatrists who had evaluated high-ranking Nazi prisoners to understand how trauma and authority functioned within a family unit. James Dean was 24 when Ray cast him to lead the project. He brought an edge of experienced frustration to the role, capturing an angst that was as much about silence as it was about rebellion. Supporting roles went to Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo, forming a central trio that looked less like a movie cast and more like a real, damaged social circle. By combining psychiatric depth with actors who actually lived the method style, Nicholas Ray was building a film that examined the cracks in the suburban dream through the lens of clinical trauma. Jim, Judy, and Plato all pull toward a single point: the juvenile division of a police station. Starting the film here immediately replaces the image of the good suburban kid with the reality of police custody. Jim Stark is squeezed between two extremes. He is smothered by a domineering mother and feels a profound, visceral disappointment in a father he perceives as weak. Judy's connection to her father has completely severed. He is terrified of her transition into womanhood and rejects her physically, driving Judy to seek male validation through a local gang of delinquents. Then there is Plato, who exists in a vacuum. His parents have abandoned him to the care of a maid in a large, empty house, leaving him isolated and desperate for any parental figure he can find. James Dean's use of method acting turned this domestic suffocation into a physical performance. He mumbled, slumped, and exploded in bursts of inarticulate vulnerability that resonated with young audiences. This frustration manifests in Jim's visible disgust when he sees his father wearing a kitchen apron. It highlights a period where masculinity was defined by rigid roles, and anything outside that standard felt like a betrayal. The film identifies the primary threat to these teenagers as the total communication breakdown occurring behind the closed doors of their middle-class homes. This internal domestic pressure was amplified by a massive external threat. They were the first generation raised in the looming shadow of the atomic age. The film highlights this dread early on. While Judy tries to eat dinner, her younger brother points a toy gun and shouts, bringing the existential terror of the Cold War right to the dinner table. This tension follows them to school. When Jim accidentally steps on the school insignia, the immediate aggressive reaction from his peers demonstrates how small acts of disrespect are treated as total rejections of social order. For students regularly taught to hide under their desks to survive nuclear annihilation, rebelling against polite suburban etiquette was a way to find control in a world that felt fundamentally unstable. The pressure to prove one's honor leads to the Chicky Run, a race toward a cliff edge that ends in a horrific car crash and the death of Buzz, the gang leader. Afterward, Jim demands a clear, black-and-white answer from his father about honor and confession. His father refuses a simple answer, instead trying to explain the complexities of the situation. While Jim sees this as weakness, his father represents the adult reality. He knows the world is morally gray, and that standing up to bullies often carries consequences that a simple list of pros and cons can't solve. The tragedy reaches its peak at the Griffith Observatory. Plato, terrified and abandoned, is gunned down by police while Jim tries to protect him. This death ends their attempt to play house in an abandoned mansion. Jim and Judy are forced to accept responsibility in a flawed world, defining their maturity by the weight of the choices they made. On September 30th, 1955, weeks before the premiere, James Dean was killed in a car crash on his way to a race. The horrific crash turned Dean into a frozen icon. Because he died at 24, he would never age into the weak father figures his characters so often struggled against. Censors in the UK and Spain banned the film for its switchblade violence, but youth audiences everywhere saw themselves on screen for the first time. They found a hero in Jim Stark. The success of Rebel alongside films like Blackboard Jungle caused a chain reaction in Hollywood. Studios realized that teenage violence and generational conflict were major box office draws, effectively creating the teen-centric genre that would dominate cinema for decades. The film's lasting impact remains in its smallest moment: Jim zipping up his own red jacket around Plato's body. It was a gesture of simple humanity that defined a generation searching for a cause in a cold, silent world.